Welcome. It's a beautiful sunny day in downtown Kent, south of London in the UK. And welcome to this session called Checking Out. So please use the chat box to introduce yourselves, your name, where you're located, who you work for, and for the most important thing that you want to take away from this session. I hope you're all safe and well and somehow making the best of the situation. It's an interactive session, so I invite you to unmute your microphones and turn on your cameras. Can you all hear me and see me? Okay, so many of you are going to be Zoom experts by now, but this is a reminder that the session is being recorded and it's going to be shared with others who booked but who can't attend the live event. So just be mindful of that when sharing any information or asking a question. I need to keep a tight rein on the timing. In fact, I've done a dry run of this, and I know it's going to be action packed to get it into 30 minutes. Surprisingly, because it's not a session that perhaps engenders a lot of interest, but it can be one of the most important steps in our process. In terms of the recording, we'll make sure it's available on our YouTube channel, and you'll automatically get a follow-up email with a link to the recording, plus a copy of the slide deck that I'm going to use. So, who am I? Okay, so I'm Colin Newbold, and if you don't know me by now, I'm heading up the TLC Online business. And Click 360 is our flagship brand of 360-degree feedback. And we've been doing this for over 25 years, so we know how to make these projects successful. And this is the 7th of 9 group mentoring sessions that are designed to share best practice, when it comes to a 360-degree feedback implementation. And you can access recordings of all the previous sessions using the link that's going to be on the very last of these slides. Now, if you haven't done so already, please use the chat facility to introduce yourselves. And while I encourage you to jump in verbally at any time, keep your microphones on, you can always just post into the chat box, and I'll monitor that from time to time. Because how I want to work with you is I'm going to deliver short bursts of information accompanied by one or more slides, and then I'm just going to open up the floor to you guys for questions, comments, observations, suggestions, etc. So just let me position where this session fits into the overall scheme of things. Take a look at this busy flowchart for just for a few seconds, and then I'll explain it. I think this is probably a really good time to just turn my camera off, and the reason for that is that it will mask. If I don't do that, it'll mask the recording. There we go. So this is the Model 360 feedback implementation plan from TLC Online. And once the reports have been generated up here, once the survey's finished, the reports have been generated, we invite participants to undertake their first feedback coaching session, which is almost always virtual these days, more so. And then this is basically to understand the key messages, the both strengths and areas for development that are coming out of the report. But towards the end of that session, before it's finished, participants are encouraged to and coached how to check out their feedback. So that's where this session fits into the big picture. Now, why checking out? Well, all too often, a 360 report raises more questions than it actually provides answers. Sometimes the comments are conflicting or just too vague. Sometimes the scores are. And to get more depth and more clarity and more granularity around what participants need to be doing differently, some years ago, we pioneered and then we later perfected a valuable process, and we nicknamed it checking out. Okay. As well, checking out enables participants to share with a selection of their raters up to 3 development priorities coming out of their first feedback coaching session. What's more, an automated version of this process is now enabled virtually, electronically, through certain of our Click 360 applications. I'll say more about that towards the end. But to get a real sense of the methodology, let's focus on the physical version first. Just a word before I move on about positioning. If you attended the session that we ran a few weeks ago on the awareness briefing, you'll remember that we asked each participant, but that's up here in the model. Just show it to you there. So that awareness briefing, it's about asking each participant to hold an invitation conversation with each of their raters, either face to face, in a normal world, or more likely these days by Zoom meeting, or even just by phone, by some online meeting or by phone. But part of that conversation towards the end of it was asking for a commitment from each rater to be allowed to check out their feedback after the report was generated. Okay, so what are we going to focus on today? Now, remember, you're the coach and you're coaching the participant towards the end of their first feedback session. Okay, so you want to be explaining to the participant the role they need to play if they want the checking out process to be, first of all, comfortable for both them and their raters, but also to be successful in gaining further clarity and depth for the participant. So we're going to take a look at the participant role, how they prepare and how they facilitate. That's the topics for today. So let's start with how you should coach the participant to prepare. Okay, let's go to this next slide. That's very interesting. What is the participant role? Okay, I know what's happened. There's an animation built into this slide. I forgot about that. Anyway, never mind, we'll work with it. So what is the participant role? By the way, the participant, remember, in our speak, it's the person at the center of the 360, the one getting the report at the end. Their role is to achieve these objectives, should come up now, yeah. To do that through a series of checking out conversations. Now, the most important bullet point on the screen is actually the last one. I'll focus on that in just a second. Checking out then is about gaining further depth and clarity, via verbal feedback from a representative proportion of the rater network. Not necessarily everybody, but that's when I talk about rater network, I'm talking about the people who contributed anonymously. So this is also an opportunity to check out any items that don't make sense, that are unclear or confusing, and any areas of conflict, where different raters, for example, in the same category even, appear to think the opposite of each other. And we coach the participant how to do this by first selecting the relevant scores and/or comments from the report that they wish to check out with each respective rater category. So we've done that in the coaching session up to this point. And then that last bullet point, you need to explain very carefully. It says not to defend or justify. See, if they do everything else right, they're going to get back from the raters examples of things the raters want them to be doing differently. So these will be specific, observable behaviors, things that they have been doing or saying or not doing or not saying, and the participant's natural reaction may be to push it back, to defend or even to justify their actions by coming up with an explanation, with reasons, with mitigating circumstances, etc., etc. And as their coach, you need to make it crystal clear to them that their role is simply to say thank you for the gift of this extra feedback. Anything else they might say will purely be questions that they ask to seek further clarification if they don't understand. So how should the participant prepare for these checking out sessions? What are we going to focus on today? Let's go there next. Now, the first group of one-to-one, that's this group here, one-to-one sessions should be relatively easy for the participant to arrange face-to-face, well, outside of lockdown anyway. But the alternatives are an online meeting platform like this or just the phone. And the advantage of the last two methods is that the participant can actually work from a script, or at the very least, some sort of crib notes. And we recommend making this a standalone appointment where checking out is the only item on the agenda. They shouldn't need to gain permission from the line manager, because this is most definitely part of the line manager's responsibility to the direct report and should be expected. However, an invitation should be extended to any rater in any of the other rater categories, and permission sought and agreement reached for a checking out conversation. Remember, if they did the rater invitation conversation, you know, the one in the awareness briefing a few weeks before, if they did it right, when they were setting up their 360 with each rater, then these checking out invitations should be expected and welcomed. Okay, so remember to coach the participant how to explain the purpose of the checking out session, and you can use words just like I did just now with the previous slide, and how many raters they need to invite, and how they should select. That's what you're doing in the closing stages of that first feedback coaching session. Now, I'm just going to see if it's worth, I'm a bit short on time, but I am going to just check in to see if I can get William to answer a question for me. William's joined us from Africa. William, if you can hear me, if you can unlock your microphone, I'm going to ask the question. Just in, you know, in an ideal world, how many raters would you expect the participant to invite? I'm not sure if you can hear me. I can't hear you, William. If you can't get the microphone to work, then just write into the chat box and I can read it from there. Oh, I can hear you now, I think. Yeah, how many raters do you think they should invite, and how would they select?
Ideally, the base or the minimum that we use is 5. So they should think of 1 manager, 2 peers that they work with, and 2 direct reports. So that's 5 on a minimum. But I'd say they are free to go beyond that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the thing is that when we're talking about checking out conversations, it's not quite the same as selecting raters for the survey. This is more about, let's say you've got 5 in a category, just as an example. Would you want to go to all 5 in a category? Let's say you've got 5 peers. You only need 2, but you've got 5. And the question is, do you need to go to all 5? And, you know, what if not all 5 actually contributed feedback on your report? Only maybe 3 did, and you don't know who they are. So how many do you select from that group? And the answer is probably enough to make it representative. So if you had 5 in a group, even though only 3 completed, you'd at least want 2 of them. If you can invite the raters that have given you conflicting feedback or even negative feedback, you know, ideally you'd want to select those raters, because you would be able to use the checking out process to improve the quality of that relationship. For example, if you know as a participant the conflict has arisen from 2 raters with opposing views, if you know who they are, you should invite them both. And not, you know, together. This is separately. These are one-on-one conversations, remember. Let me just shut the chat box because I think it's probably obliterating the screen on the video, on the recording. And, you know, it might be difficult to predict the length of time they're going to need, the participant's going to need for each of these conversations. It's going to very much depend on how many items of ambiguity or conflict they have. Although my advice to anyone doing checking out is to limit those areas to three topics of either ambiguity or conflict. And preferably you try and keep the topic from the rater category. In other words, is a comment or a score from the rater category that you're checking out. in terms of timing, you've also got to allow for the each of the development priorities to be checked out, and we recommend no more than 3. So there's 3 of those. So I would say, you know, from experience, it's got to be at least 30 minutes, that conversation with each of the raters that you select. Okay, so just, you know, just to recap on this, it's not everybody. It's a representative proportion, and if you can, the ones where you want to either check out what you believe is opposing opinions or perceptions, or where you want to build that relationship. You want to build up the quality of that relationship, which is not perfect currently. Okay, now in the second piece here, scheduled team meeting for direct reports. What do we mean here? This time, the participants should be doing the checking out as a group event, you know, like a team meeting, if you will. You know, they've got all of the direct reports, all that can make the meeting anyway, in that room together, and they need to allow appropriate time for the session and to diarize that session in advance. You're actually inviting them to come to a team meeting. I'm not going to put them up on screen, but just from experience, recommended timelines for this, I would allow at least 10 minutes to introduce it. You probably explain the purpose in setting the meeting up, but you want to be giving them a proper introduction. So 10 minutes at least for that. 45 to 60 minutes for the direct reports to do the work, and I'll show you what I mean by the work in a minute. And then 15 to 20 minutes for one of those direct reports, like a spokesperson to feed back to you. Feeding back, including the discussion around development suggestions. Okay, so as you can imagine, and you can say this to the participant, you're still in the coaching session. You remember the first coaching session, and you're introducing the concept of checking out to the participant. You can actually say to them that this session will dramatically improve on or build on relationships, depending where they were before with the team members. It's a significant trust building exercise when it's conducted with complete authenticity. If you want to be a really good leader, a really good manager, this is a fantastic way of getting there. And while we're on the subject of direct reports, and really as an intro to the topic of facilitation, which is coming up next, I just want to show you a model layout for the room. Let's see if we can show you this. This is just a mock-up of how you might lay the room out for this team meeting, where you're going to check it out with all members of your team at the same time. Now, I'm going to go through the golden question in just a moment. GQ, that's this flip chart here. We'll come back to that. Number 1 is a flip chart. These are flip charts on the wall. And this is just the items of ambiguity or conflict. There's about 3 of them, remember, and you want to leave enough space under each one for some responses, because you're going to get these guys to write onto these flip charts using flip chart pens. And then underneath, sorry, not underneath, next to these, you've got 2, 3, and 4. These are each of the key development priorities. You know, you want as brief a heading as possible, right at the top, so that there's space for responses underneath. So this development priority would be something like, you know, listen better, praise more, plan more efficiently, you know, those kinds of things. It's what's coming out of your 360 report, and it's the most important development priorities that you and your coach have agreed in the session up to this point. And then DS stands for development suggestions. So we're going to cover all of these in a little bit more detail right now. So let me just move to the next slide, which is all about facilitation. Let's bring that up. There we go. Okay, so how do you facilitate? Now, remember, we're doing this one-on-one, either face-to-face or on the phone or using Zoom or something like that, or we're doing it in a group with the team. Okay, how should the participant facilitate each of these checking out sessions? So once the communication medium has been chosen and the appointment's been set, then setting the scene, this is actually when it's, you know, when you start, setting the scene is about thanking them for the opportunity, you know, thanking them for actually engaging with you through the process, and for sharing you know, their feedback in a bit more depth with you. So you want to be sharing the purpose, you want to be using words like we've just covered, and we recommend that checking out is the only item on the agenda. Okay, you're allowing about 30 minutes for this, remember. This is obviously for the one-on-ones. Now, the participant should start by exploring each topic of ambiguity or conflict, and then to move on to each of the key development priorities next. Once again, it doesn't really matter whether or not the manager or any of the other raters personally expressed the ambiguity, the conflict, or the development priority. The fact is that in your coaching session, you've agreed with your coach, those are the things that have come out of the report. You know, they were the highlights of the report, or maybe the lowlights, but you know, they're the things that you've agreed to investigate further using checking out. And it doesn't really matter if they were, you know, not expressed by everybody. It's a general feeling across the rater network. Although I would just add a caveat to that. If the manager didn't agree, you know, if the manager clearly didn't agree with one of those statements of ambiguity or conflict, or maybe one of the development priorities, then you would automatically want to have a useful discussion with them about that. That's on the manager checking out conversation. Now, the golden question came up just now. Sorry, I've gone shooting past it. There we go. The golden question. I'm going to leave you to read just for a few seconds. Let you read it and absorb it. If you're watching the recording, I invite you to do the same. Now, there's just two versions of the golden question there. If you're not using words like this, then why not just take a few more seconds to imagine yourself saying these words in your own voice? I'm using silence because I absolutely know how important these sentences are. Trust me, it's taken us years to perfect these words. And every word in these sentences counts. I'm giving them to you, our intellectual property, in effect. I'm giving them to you completely free of charge. Okay, so we're going to move to the next slide, which is actually coming back to the one we had on just now. What you need to do as the participant, you need to practice modeling any of the development priorities where relevant during this checking out session. I'm going to give you an example. Remember, you're the coach. In this scenario, you're going to be coaching the participant to do this. Okay, so in this first feedback session, we're doing the checking out piece of that, right at the end. We're going to try to coach the participant to practice modeling any of these development priorities where it's relevant during their checking out sessions. So what do I mean by that? As an example, if there was a development priority around listening better, for example, then using the checking out conversation would be an opportunity for the participant to practice listening better. Does that make sense? Okay, when it comes to topics of ambiguity or conflict, the participant could ask, could you share an example, or could you describe an occasion when you have observed me doing or not doing, or saying or not saying, whatever it is, you know. In other words, the feedback should be something that the rater has experienced firsthand, not heard about from some third party. And then lastly, you should be coaching the participant to go back to each development priority in turn and asking the rater if they have any development suggestions. Especially important is what the manager can do, you know, to help them. And then the participant ends the session by thanking the rater sincerely and committing to return with an outlined action plan once the second feedback coaching session is finished. Now, we've got an upcoming group mentoring session devoted entirely to checking in. It's actually the last one in our series. So do make sure you sign up for that to get the full picture, because that comes up in relation to this. And as a coach, you should remind participants once more of the important rules they need to adopt under the heading of managing your reactions. Okay. So this is information for the participant. Participant, please paraphrase from time to time what you're hearing, just to make it obvious that you've got it, you know. And you know, also, as a coach, you should remind them of the responsibility they have in terms of accepting the additional feedback gathered from this checking out process, you know, whether they should take it on board or not. They should also consider if the perceptions that they're hearing will either help or hinder them, the participant, from achieving their goals, their development goals. Sometimes, you know, sadly, the perception from an individual rater and a colleague who you work alongside simply says more about them than it does about you. God give me the wisdom to know the difference is an old saying that comes to mind. Another maxim I adhere to, which I think has relevance in this context, is that every response I get is either a positive response, you know, in other words, a genuine attempt by the giver to help me grow and develop, or it's a cry for help. I'm not suggesting you might use that with each rater, but just for yourself to think about that. But basically, the main rules are: don't defend or justify, only speak if you don't understand what's being said to you. Okay, well, we're pretty much at the end, but I just want to show you the next steps. Hopefully there's going to be sufficient time after each checking out conversation for the participant to reflect and to prepare what new and rich data they're going to bring to the second feedback coaching session. And then the focus of that session will be on building a robust and timelined development action plan. Okay. Remember, our implementation model has 2 feedback coaching sessions, and checking out is the process that takes place in between. And that's why we leave several weeks for that, because it does take time to have these conversations, to do the team meeting, etc. But checking in, as you'll see from the upcoming group mentoring session, it's a review process. Now, before I leave you, I just want to show you, got a few minutes, a quick few slides about the automated version of the checking out process. Now, there's a lot on this slide, but what we're actually showing here is the workbook and the digital report. So this is the digital report. This is the workbook that, you know, you click on the blue button here and it opens up the workbook alongside, or depending on the size of screen you're looking at, it's either going to be toggling between the two, or you're going to be sitting on the screen with them side by side. And then we've just blown this up, this grid here, we've just blown that up so you can see it more easily. So let's be honest, the automated electronic virtual version of checking out is never going to be as effective as the physical equivalent. Okay, but it may offer advantages over what you've been doing up until now, or if you think that the physical process is a stretch too far, you know, it doesn't work for all of our clients. So the automated process is enabled upon setting up a survey. And if you want help with that, you'll need to reach out to me separately, and I can show you how that works. But it's not available currently on what we call the self-drive tool, the Click360 self-drive tool. And the other thing to say is that it only works with the digital report. You'll see that on the screen. Or more specifically, with the built-in integrated workbook. And it's still in beta testing on the Click360 self-drive application. But it's available on all the other enterprise platforms and on our pay-as-you-go service. So just to show you what's going on this screen, once the participant has chosen up to their 3 development priorities, they commit the data to the grid in the workbook. This is in step 6, by the way, of the workbook. And they check the box underneath. Now, this whole thing in red here only comes up if it's been enabled at the survey setup stage, right up front. Okay. But if if that box has been ticked, then this phrase appears with a little checkbox. And as soon as they've finished writing all of this, they can then check that box. They put a tick in that box, and it will trigger either the electronic checking out process or the electronic checking in process, or both. That will depend on what you've set up at the very beginning. Okay. Checking out invites go out immediately. Checking in invites go out according to the chosen delay. I'm going to say much more about that part when we do the checking in session in about a couple of weeks' time. But just be aware that checking out invites go out immediately. So they need to make sure that all of the words here are how they want the wording to appear. And then what happens next, if I go to the next slide. Oh, I've gone backwards. Sorry about that. Let's go back. There we go. So what happens next is that it's the same process really as the physical, but it's just that the rater gets an email. By the way, this is all raters. You're not, as it, with the physical checking out, when you're doing it verbally, you're actually choosing a representative proportion of your raters in each category. But with the automated version, it's every rater that gets an email with a login that takes them to a screen. This is the email hiding behind here, and there's the login. So the rater is being asked, being invited to take part in this further stage. And once they click on the link, it opens up a screen on their browser which simply asks the golden question underneath each development priority. You can see it here. So there's the development priority, and then this is the golden question, and then this box here, which is actually showing text in it, but that's actually a free text box that the rater types their response into. Okay, and then underneath there's actually another one which is another free text box that's inviting them to suggest development actions for the participant. And then once they've filled in the boxes for each of the development priorities and they've clicked submit, what happens next is that the participant gets an immediate email alert. So let me show you that. Okay, so that's all the participant gets. It's an email alert. It's a bit like the that film, You Got Mail alert, and it's basically got a built-in login again, which takes the participant to a screen like this, where the new feedback is listed. First of all, by each development priority. So there's a development priority. Then it's listed by rater category, and then there are two columns. One, the first column is whatever was typed into that first text box. So this is an example of some further checking out feedback that's been given to the participant by the manager. And then to the right would be any development suggestions that have been typed into the second box. And all of this is automated. It already exists on our enterprise client platforms, and it's provided at no extra charge. Okay, well, that's basically it for next week. We've overrun a wee bit. Now, William, if you're still there, I think you are. If you have any questions or suggestions or comments, observations about what I've covered, which was pretty one way and pretty rapid, now's your time. Whatever time you've got left, ask away. Any questions from your side or any suggestions?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now, William. Yep.
Okay, cool. So this is very interesting. I'm sure for ALFs we don't get to do all this stuff, but pretty awesome stuff to look at, and I can't wait to. I'll take some time and go through the recording again and see, and just go back to our platform and see how best to interact with it and how to set this up. Because I think now, thinking that seeing how we are moving into a digital space where we'll be doing all the trainings online. So I think this can become a fantastic value add for the program and for the 360 piece.
Yep. You've got the choice of doing it virtually using verbal conversations. You can still do that. Actually, I think Zoom's a fantastic platform for that. Or, it doesn't have to be Zoom. It could be Microsoft Teams or Google Hangouts or whatever, GoToMeeting, whatever. But the point is that one of the advantages of using a screen is that the participant or the participant who's conducting the conversation can have their script next to them. And they can keep looking back at it, just to remind them what to do next, or how to process that conversation. Good. And then if you need any more help, William, in setting up the electronic version of this, then just shout, and I can always jump on a Zoom meeting with you, and I can just show you how to do it on your platform.
All right. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, now just to conclude, next week's session will be devoted to development action planning. That's the coaching second session. And
Okay.
hopefully that'll now be enriched in the real world by the results of the checking out process. And in the final week, we're going to have this checking in process.
Okay.
To book future sessions, remember just to click on the link here if you haven't already. And remember, you're going to get a copy of these slides as a follow-up. Feedback coaching session number 2 is next Thursday, and it's at 4 o'clock our time in the UK. So thanks to all of you for your attendance and participation today. And please stay safe, stay well. Bye for now.
All right. Thank you, Colin, and enjoy your evening.
Thanks.